Community-based worker engaged lessons from the field of participatory action research. So although we appreciate everyone here, there's been a little bit of confusion with the room. So if anyone's here for the Care Revolution film showing, we'd love to keep you, but we understand if you need to join that session. It's right along the way over there. There's been a little bit of musical chairs in rooms, but we're together. So the reason why I wanted to do this particular session is because I mostly come from a community organizing background. So it's been about 30 years of mostly community organizing, community labor organizing, and more recently, labor education. I'm at the UMass Dartmouth Labor Education Center. And a couple of the things that I've seen over the years were a big separation between research and organizing, right? So for example, when I did some consulting with a group out of Providence called PRISM, the Providence Student Youth Movement, they had a collaboration with a faculty, a sociologist at Brown University, who had instructed them to keep don't keep any contacts, right? So they did a tremendous job before I came in as a consultant, surveying over 2,000 Southeast Asian youth in Providence, which is a sizable percentage of the community there, right? So when I was so excited to see the data that came out of that, but I was a little distressed when I asked about, okay, let's get people together because we're gonna decide on a campaign and we need to come up with a strategy based on people directly affected, basic 101 of organizing. I was told that the person up on College Hill had told them, no way, right? So we had to brainstorm, okay, where those surveys were collected, where do people congregate, and we had to kind of recreate some of that work, right? Whereas if we would have had an integrated participatory action research methodology prior to that, then we would have had people's contacts, right? So, in the community organizing world too, there's also sometimes a temptation to look at surveys not as an organizing tool. I was fortunate to be a tenant organizer with the Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants, and we did have a little bit more grassroots participatory action strategy. In fact, we would have accountability sessions with HUD on the national level. We'd bring 400 to 600 tenants from around the country, and we would make it clear to HUD officials that it was tenants that were the eyes and ears, right, of HUD. And those surveys weren't seen as just tallying a report that was handed to a HUD official, but they were part and parcel of organizing tenants, right? Going door to door and making sure that tenants understood that it was their power, the power of the tenant movement and the power of tenant unions that was actually going to build enough pressure to win those concerns, right? It wasn't just creating a paper trail with HUD or articulating a report, right? So I'm really excited to be here because I've also seen how talking to workers in a union context can make a big difference in even the gaps in corporate research that sometimes in our siloed work happens, right? So when I was the director of Jobs with Justice in Rhode Island, the UFCW Local 326, we were getting ready to strike, potentially negotiating with Stop and Shop in Providence, and we were giving customers these little coupons, right, to hand to the management saying, I'm not going to shop here, I'm not going to cross the picket line if there's a strike. And we were getting reports back from the negotiating committee, and the negotiating committee, this was in 2008 and 9, right? So we were going through the Great Recession, and the negotiating committee was coming back and saying, Stop and Shop is saying this Great Recession is really hurting them, and we can't expect any raises, and we got to cut health care. And so talking to the workers and being out there talking to shop stewards who were saying, actually, we're busier than ever. The Great Recession, actually, there's a lot of people that used to go out to restaurants that are now increasingly shopping in grocery stores, right? So it took away that negotiating chip that Stop and Shop was trying to battled with, right? They were giving out false information, and we couldn't have challenged that if we didn't close that circuit, right, and have communication directly with workers, because that wasn't something the research team had highlighted before that, right? So I'm so excited to have a couple phenomenal participatory action research, community-grounded folks that are part of this session. And we're really hoping that we're going to have enough time so you can share some of your examples, challenges, successes, and how we can continue to learn together. So we're going to start with Steve McKay. He's an associate professor of sociology at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He's the director of the UC Santa Cruz Center for Labor Studies. His research interests include labor and labor markets, migration, racial formation, globalization, and social change. He has recently worked on 2 large research projects, one on low-wage service workers and another on affordable housing crisis for tenants, using a community-initiated, student-engaged research approach. The approach links community-based participatory action research with hands-on research training of underrepresented and first-generation undergrads. So thanks so much, Steve, for coming up and sharing some lessons, and thanks so much.
Thanks all for coming. It was my first time at this conference, so I'm really excited to work with all the folks in the different groups. So I am coming from a university kind of position in some ways, and trying to find out how to better do. So my research has been on labor, on my first book on women workers in the electronics industry in the Philippines, second project on migrant Filipino seafarers. So I've always done elements of work on labor. So locally in Santa Cruz, we've been having events, typical university-based kind of stuff where we invite people. But we connected with the California Rural Legal Assistance, which provides legal services for low-income people, mainly in our region, a lot of farm workers. And they came to us with a research puzzle, which was sort of how they wanted to better know what it was like for workers who were moving from ag work into low-wage services. So they're seeing the transition. Anecdotally, and people coming in their door were coming with new problems, but they also realized that people moving from ag to low-wage services didn't know their rights as well. But they didn't have the capacity to do the research to figure out how better to serve their folks, or have the capacity to do outreach to those folks. And so they asked us if we would be interested. And I've always been a researcher who works primarily by myself. I'm an ethnographer, spent a lot of time. So I was trying to think, how could I kind of respond to a need for research to make it useful, right, to the community. And so we came up kind of basically by hook and crook this new kind of model that we've been working on, which we call scissor. That's why the fingers throw in scissor. Community-initiated, student-engaged research. And that's a huge mouthful, so that's why we like scissor. But we wanted to keep this because we want to be responsive. So that's the idea of being community-initiated. So we get the research question from the organizations. But then we use sort of the students as a way to train students who do want to engage in community work. But then that gives us able to scale up the research to make it useful in a short amount of time. And so this is why I'm going to run through the process and then a couple of these projects. And definitely stop. I know I'm probably going to talk too fast. But we can talk about like how might, and we're working on a third project now with several unions to look at workforce housing. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we institutionalize some of this to the benefit of the different groups? So we call it a scissor because you have faculty work with students, and there's ways to get students involved in research. That's pretty typical. Okay, so there are these kind of partners before. Then you have students getting involved in community, so through service learning and things like that. And then you have faculty getting involved in community groups. But it rarely kind of all comes together. And so the idea is trying to be at the sweet spot in the center of trying to connect all three of those. So give our students experience in doing research, but also in terms of getting community engagement. And I've had several students who've gone on who now work kind of doing work with nonprofits, for example, or community organizations doing research. And so that's, ideal for us in sort of seeing that. And then I work at the University of California. It's a public institution. We should be doing research for the public good, right? And so thinking about this connection between community and who is our research for, right, in that kind of way. And then students are often involved in community, but not necessarily doing research. And our other mission is to produce new knowledge, right? And so we're trying to put that all together in this model. So, so the idea is we work with community organizations. So our first project with Community Rural Legal Assistance, and then the Day Worker Center, which is organizing workers, before we're in front of Home Depot and other things. And then our second project, we still work with those groups, but then another with Community Action Board, Community Bridges, and then our third one, now working with CIU, Local 521, represents city and county workers, and Greater Santa Cruz Federation of Teachers. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But the idea is it's community initiated. So this is, again, where we find out what do these organizations may need in terms of research. And then we talk about it in terms of student engaged. And so, again, here, partly training students, but again, trying to connect them to the university and a public mission. And it just promotes a dialogue where students get to talk to each other. So we spend a lot of time with each other. And we have, a lot of universities around the country, but particularly in California, particularly the UCs, a lot of first generation and underrepresented students. And they're often seen as having a deficit. Right? They're a deficit because their English isn't great, or they're first generation, they don't know. And the part of what we want to do is to flip the script and make their deficits really an asset. And in fact, they're a real asset because they come from the communities that we are engaging this research in, and we get better data because they're from these communities. Right? So the people who often, very vulnerable populations who are not going to answer the phone, not going to answer the door, if we are able to work with community organizations and our students who share a very similar background and language are able to gather those interviews and surveys, we actually get better data. So that's what we sell to the people at the university that say you're biased or this is not good research. We say it's actually much better research, right, in that sense. And then, again, what it allows us to do is scale up this research. And I'll talk about what that means in terms of being large. So I'm going to talk about two projects that we've done. And so one is called Working for Dignity, which was a focus on the low-wage workers. And we've always had, and then one that we're still kind of in the process of is called No Place Like Home, which is about affordable housing. And you'll see two things that are really important that came out of our work was that it actually had this very social sciencey, we want to have large surveys, it's very rigorous research, but you'll notice it's not just about the conditions, right? That we have a very humanities kind of point. So when thinking about work, it's really about dignity. So it's about wages as well as about dignity. And as organizers, you know how important that kind of way of framing it. But so it was a way, again, to connect the students and the community. And in terms of housing, it was this notion of home. How do you create a sense of home during a housing crisis? And so these were ways that we could kind of bridge in a lot of ways the kind of social sciencey stuff with this sort of real kind of visceral meanings, and then also connected to organizing. So in our first project, Working for Dignity, we were able to, because I had the courses that I usually teach in sociology, over several quarters able to get over 100 students involved in this. So we're training students in how to do human subjects, how to do surveys, how to do oral histories and interviews. So we were able to collect in about a year and a half, 1,300 surveys, right? So we have enough of a number that we can really see patterns in what's going on in different kind of ways. And they also conducted 75 interviews. And so we were able to do that kind of work on that scale. And we were looking primarily at wage theft, looking at workplace violations, health and safety, and discrimination and retaliation. So we had a pretty long, involved survey. And so we collected that. But it was very important to also do kind of large public events to share it. So not only did we share it with our community partners, but we had large events where we invited people from the university who also employ low-wage workers, community and local electeds. And so we make these large events, and so up to 400 to 600 people will come to our community, so off-campus events, so we can share the research. And the university likes to take credit for doing this, but we also make sure to hold the university's feet to the fire as a big employer. Who are they employing? How are they outsourcing various kind of work, right? So we want to use our position at the university, but we also want to hold our own institution, responsible for what's going on. So the project and the students built a great website, and maybe I can show you a little bit of that. But the idea is that we had teams of students who did surveying, so we would each time get them to train them, who did interviews, but we had people who could do the data management, learn the database programs, and then we started off with paper surveys, and by our second project, we'd move all to digital platforms, and we can talk about that. And that was all the students being able to figure this out. And then visual documentation and then the website. So I'll see if I can show the website. This is the, can you see, website that we were able to build. So here, we could show the students built these websites, so we have it. It's in English and Spanish, and the final report's there. But it's a way for people to get into it. You can click on the different issues, and the students also did it so where they were able to do the infographics to make it very clear and easy to what's going on. So again, this is based on 1,300 surveys, but we're able to do this. And they also created these digital, so based on our interviews, they created these digital stories. So let's see if I can play a section of this. We'll see if the speakers are.
Tengo 8 años trabajando en housekeeping. Yo limpio los baños, pasillos, showers, escaleras y el elevador. Son 4 escaleras y cada escalera tiene 6 pisos. Tengo que andar cargando una backpack y una aspiradora para ir aspirando piso por piso y después ir trapeando también piso por piso. Yo pienso que por ser mujer me están discriminando. Son 2 hombres que están trabajando también en el edificio y yo soy la única mujer, pero yo tengo aparte más trabajo que ellos. Me dicen que no, que es la misma cantidad de trabajo, en cual no es cierto. Ya me enfadé de estarles diciendo y nunca hace nada. Cuando quise cambiarme me dijeron que no, que eran 2 años. Ya cumplí los 2 años y dicen que es por señoría. Si se quiere mover de una área es por señoría, si otra persona lo pide. Entonces aquí voy a estar atada aquí por saber qué tanto tiempo. Además de eso, mi salario no me alcanza. Es un área muy cara vivir aquí en California. Mucho de renta, más aparte tenía yo mis 2 hijas chiquitas y aún pues no nos alcanzaba para la subsistencia de la comida o de la renta. Aquí es muy caro California. Deberían igualar más los salarios, de que aquí es un estado muy caro y deberían de subir un poquito más el salario, porque ni a $10 que va a entrar nos alcanza a pagar los 2,150 de renta en un apartamento.
So the model is to pair this kind of way of sort of approach, having a large, very rigorous study of sort of how it goes with sort of some of these other elements, and then when we do present these, it provides a platform for community discussions about these issues, right? So how do you marry kind of this narrative with the kind of social science research? And so this is the website. So then we have multiple events, and we do them in Spanish and in English in different areas. We had here just a forum on this is 2015, so on the $15 minimum wage, and we had then created wage theft clinics. So we did a number of these to again prevent from just being a piece of research that ends up on a shelf, is to really have a lot of public presentations of the data. And often, again, this is the position of being, how do you walk that line between advocate and researcher? If we produce this kind of researcher, but then host basically a forum to talk about it, then we get to sit back and say, here's the data. Now let's talk about what is a livable wage in California. and then invite a number of different people, workers speak, experts, and we have people from the business community and different things like that. So we can be the ones, again, clearly advocates in a lot of ways with the research, but the research itself is, kind of can stand on its own in that different way. So, so we have these different dialogues. So what was the impact, at least for our, this is again kind of small, but this is a way students can get involved locally. But in part because we were able to do this, our community partner, CRLA, was able to go to the county and using our documentation on wage theft, get funding for wage theft clinics to be done on a monthly basis. So there was a way that people can come and file their claims. And part of it came out a new kind of economic justice alliance. Different groups around Santa Cruz kind of started organizing around economic justice issues, and that's part of a coalition that we continue to be part of. So the idea is, again, how do you make the research useful? And this was one outcome. So I'll just talk quickly about, you saw in that little clip that she said, it's my meager resources can't pay that $2,100 for rent, right? And that was one of the biggest things that came out of the study of low-wage workers was it's so crazy expensive to live in California, and Santa Cruz in particular. Santa Cruz is actually the least affordable place to live in the entire state of California, right? So if you look at it in terms of looking at the wage, so if affordable housing is you only spend a third amount of your money on rent, you have to make $35 an hour in Santa Cruz to have a 2-bedroom, and that's fair market rent, so it's actually higher than that. That's by HUD standards. But renters only make, on average, $14 an hour, right? So you have to work 100 hours a week, 2.5 full-time jobs, if you're going to support and be able to pay for that, using that affordability. So it became a key area of also organizing, and I'll talk about our third project, which is working with the unions now, is that they're starting to hear from their members that it's really housing has become this huge issue. And so now we're involved with them to learn more about what their members want around housing. But our project was similar. This time we scaled it up even a little more. We've had 200 students involved in the research. We were able to collect 1,700 surveys and 75 interviews. And then again, on this model of you doing now tenant rights workshops and large public events. So the idea is how do you build partnerships? And so again, it's not just us. We have faculty, different faculty, support centers on campus that help us with the research, the students from different groups, but also lots of community organization, right? And this is just for this one project. But the idea is that we work often with the same community partners, so we build a deeper relationship with them, right, in these different ways. So again, doing surveys as students, doing surveys, doing the data, and then again, the digital stories. And I just want to show you quickly the website called No Place Like Home, again, that the student built, but we were able to do, and we haven't put in the video stuff because we just launched this, but let's see if this will come up. So this is our survey results. We were able to show on different issues, for example, rent burden, so the people who are spending more than 30%, so this is 1,700 people in these different neighborhoods, that they're spending 70%. 70% of renters are spending more than they have. And that's even 50% is the extreme rent burden by federal standards. It's 41% of people. And then we found that there's a group of people also, it doesn't even exist. We call it obscene rent burden. It's not even a category. With people spending, that a quarter of the people are spending more than 70% of their income on rent, right? And as someone said, the rent eats first. It's the only area of basic needs that's not subsidized heavily. So you can often find food, and if you have to go to the emergency room, you can get medical care. But if you don't have a house, if you can't pay for rent, you're literally on the street, right? So this is a worker issue, right? And we want to sort of look at it. And so we're still in the middle of this project, but we were able to build this. And again, you can see we also looked at overcrowding. And we have a larger, this is our county, and in the south part is much more heavily Latino. Latinos have a much higher rate of overcrowding. So west side is predominantly white, so only 16%, and that's where the university is, but then the south part of the county. So we're looking at geographic disparity as well, and talking about what does that mean in our community when some people are doing, like everyone's hurting, but some are hurting a lot more, and how do we build these kind of connections. And then we also did the stories, and I don't have time, but we could show similar ones where the students were able to produce, this time looking at these issues. And so this is called No Place Like Home. So we again try to do another connection to how does this affect policy. So clearly in California and around the country, housing has become a big issue, particularly in California. So there's been, in large part, in conjunction with a lot of other folks that are doing things, we're able to provide the kind of data to show locally why rent control has to at least be part of the conversation about sort of how do you make this place a livable place. Now there's other parts of the puzzle, but rent control is definitely part of it. And so there has been a big push. It's now likely, they put in a rent freeze now, and it's going to be on the ballot hopefully in November. And so we're working in conjunction with some of these other community organizations that are working on local and statewide kind of policy, but showing how locally people can get involved. And so that's the model that we're working with. And then we have sort of a new thing that came out of this in some ways to look at it is, well, what are some alternatives in terms of housing? So rent control is one, and producing affordable housing, and housing for whom? Right? And so actually here, there is a model in terms of teacher unions and places that have a really hard time recruiting teachers because of high costs in Silicon Valley and then over in Santa Cruz. So there is this move to sort of develop some teacher housing, but they're facing neighborhood resistance. You know, those, I don't know, loud and partying teachers, I don't know why you would be against teacher housing. But in fact, and so thinking about, so strategically we're thinking about, so we studied renters. So we were able to go around, and so the students went around and knocking on doors across the county, but we couldn't capture displacement. All those people who had to leave because of that. So we actually partnered with the SEIUs. They represent the city and county workers and nonprofit workers. And we're going to start this new project where we look at their members that can't afford to live in the city and county that they serve. Right? And to use that to document it first off, but to think about politically when you're talking about how do you get more housing built. The first people that people have sympathy for are those who are serving the county and the community, right? Often it's first responders, but we're looking at then people who work, and union members who work and serve the community and teachers and trying to highlight their issues around housing, with an idea that if we can organize, all the while we're also doing kind of the rent control, right? It's trying to think about the different strands of housing. But there's often lots of anecdotal information about how expensive it is or how screwed people are getting, but there's often not a systematic collection of that data. And so our idea is to provide some of that fuel for these policy discussions, but also produce it in a way that is accessible, that's also useful for organizers and community members themselves, right? And in this sense, the students represent about 30% of the renters in Santa Cruz, and we're doing a big push to get them registered to vote so that they could be a block, right, in this. And there's often been a town-gown kind of split. Universities here doing their thing, and then there's the community. And the idea is that as students, as renters, could be this bridge where it's about, like, if renters got together and they make up together the renters in town and renters from the university, there are a majority of people in the city of Santa Cruz. They could pass rent control if they were organized and stop seeing themselves as the problem. And instead say, oh, maybe we're all in the same boat as renters, and we could change it in that sense. So that's the broader kind of, in some ways, political and organizing goals. And we're just trying to figure out how could research and how could our position at the university be useful strategically, right, in that way. And so that's where then thinking about, well, our model is to think about this as community initiated, but we'd like to get a step further and really sort of think about it as a more collaborative kind of model and think about maybe, and with the SEIU one, we're going to think about, training not just the students to do the collection, but the union members and it's interesting that SEIU, that at least our local in the region, worried about Janus and other things, are thinking about how do we get our members more involved. And it turns out housing becomes this good one of those ways. And so that's one of the reasons they're exploring this. And so we're excited to work with them to be thinking about alternatives. So not just documenting the problem, but thinking about how do you move toward kind of collaborative solutions where again, research can play a role. So I don't know how much time I took. I think I talked really fast. But we can, if you have questions or anything like that, I'm happy to.
So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from both of the presenters. So if you can hold your questions, because we want to make sure. But thank you so much for your presentation. So I wanted to start by thanking Susan Williams, who is one of the panelists, but is unfortunately unable to join us. And it was Susan with the Highlander Center that actually coordinated Pam Tao Lee to come out to the Highlander and present on participatory action research. And this was, I don't know, 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I had remembered the workshop, and I reached out to Highlander and asked, who was that? And so it was Susan that connected us. And, and Pam, we're very fortunate to have us here. There's a small blurb about her, and I'm going to take the liberty to get a little deeper into who Pam is and why we're so fortunate that she's here right now, okay? So the bio on the official program is Pam Tao Lee has been an activist in the Chinese Progressive Association since the 1970s. Pam has taught at San Francisco City College in the Bayview and has been involved in participatory action research collaborations between the Chinese Progressive Association and Unite Here with hotel workers and with restaurant workers. So, I appreciate how humble that is, right? But at the same time, I was doing organizing training in Boston, Massachusetts, and afterwards we had a little debrief, and there was an activist there from the Chinese Progressive Association in Boston, and I happened to mention coming to here, and he was very jealous, and he called you an OG of the CPA, and if you look on the CPA's website, you'll see, right, a glimpse of Pam's work that's, she helped found the CPA, which went national, has been involved since 1972 in the anti-war struggle and housing struggles. And it's very inspiring that she's here to share some of her examples. On the CPA website, too, there's multiple different case studies that involve surveying 600, 700, 1,000 people on multiple issues. So I'm going to let Pam give you a glimpse of that, and she has an exercise to share with us. And then we'll make sure we have enough time, so hold your questions for both Steve and Pam. And we really want to hear what you take away from this, some of the ideas or work that you're doing, and we can maybe talk through some of the challenges that we all face. So thank you so much, Pam, and just tell me when you want me to hand these out.
So one of the